The halls of Westlake Music Academy gleamed with polished marble and echoed with the sounds of practicing musicians. Amid the talented students and prestigious faculty moved a slender woman in her early 30s who seemed almost invisible to everyone around her. May worked as an administrative assistant, her footsteps quiet as she delivered mail, filed paperwork, and kept the academy running behind the scenes. No one paid much attention to May. She had started working at the academy 3 months ago, shortly after moving to the city. She wore simple clothes, usually a modest blouse and dark pants, and kept her long black hair tied back in a neat bun. Unlike the confident instructors who strode through the halls in expensive outfits and designer shoes, May seemed to want to blend into the background. Most mornings she arrived early to prepare the offices before anyone else showed up. She would make fresh coffee for the teacher's lounge, sort the mail, and ensure that all the practice rooms had been properly cleaned overnight. The building felt peaceful during those quiet moments before the chaos of the day began, before the hallways filled with rushing students carrying instrument cases and instructors barking orders. "Ms. Chen, did you finish typing up those student evaluation forms?" Professor Winters called out as he passed her desk without slowing down. He didn't wait for her response, already turning the corner toward the faculty meeting room. "Yes, sir. I left them on your desk this morning," May replied softly, though he was already gone. She sighed and returned to organizing the upcoming recital programs. The teachers rarely acknowledged her presence unless they needed something. Professor Winters, who taught advanced violin, barely made eye contact when speaking to her. Dr. Garrett, the vocal instructor, sometimes confused her with the previous administrative assistant who had left months ago. And Dr. Reynolds, the piano department head, treated her like a servant rather than a colleague. During lunch breaks, May would find a quiet corner in the courtyard to eat alone. She brought homemade food in small containers, dumplings, rice, and vegetables that filled the air with fragrant spices. Sometimes she would pull out her headphones and listen to music while she ate. Anyone watching closely might have noticed how her fingers occasionally tapped against her knee in rhythm with whatever piece she was hearing. But no one ever watched May closely. On rainy days, she ate at her desk while reading books about music theory or famous composers. The instructors who passed by assumed she was just browsing magazines or novels. They never imagined that behind her quiet exterior lived a deep understanding of musical composition and history. "Excuse me," a young boy said, approaching her desk, hesitantly one afternoon. He couldn't have been more than 12, with tousled hair and a violin case clutched tightly in his hands. "I can't find my teacher, and my lesson was supposed to start 10 minutes ago." May smiled warmly at him. Children were different. They didn't look through her the way adults did. "What's your teacher's name?" "Professor Winters," the boy replied, shifting his weight nervously from one foot to the other. "Ah," May nodded, checking the schedule on her computer. "He's running late from a meeting across town, but don't worry. He called earlier and asked if someone could help you tune your violin while you wait. Would you like me to find another instructor to assist you?" The boy looked around the empty hallway and then back at May with a hopeful expression. "Could you help? I mean, if you know how." May hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I know a little about violins. Let's see what we can do." She led the boy to a nearby practice room where he carefully opened his case and pulled out a half-sized violin. The instrument was well worn but lovingly maintained. May gently took it from him and placed it under her chin with a familiarity that surprised the young student. "This is a beautiful instrument," she said softly, plucking each string and listening carefully to the pitch. She adjusted the pegs with confident movements, her ears detecting subtle differences in tone that most people would miss. When she handed it back to him, the violin was perfectly tuned. "Wow, you're good at that," the boy said, his eyes wide. "Are you sure you're not a teacher?" May laughed lightly, a sound rarely heard in the academy halls. "Not here, no. Just an assistant who loves music." "You should be a teacher," he declared with the straightforward honesty of youth. "You're nicer than Professor Winters." "That's very kind of you to say," May replied, touched by his words. "But everyone has different gifts. Professor Winters is an excellent musician who can help you become your best." Just then, they heard rapid footsteps in the hallway. and Professor Winters appeared at the door, slightly out of breath. "There you are, James. I see you've met Ms. Chen." He nodded briefly toward May before turning his attention fully to his student. "Let's not waste any more time. We need to work on your Bach piece for the upcoming recital." May slipped out of the room, unnoticed once again. As she walked back to her desk, she could hear the first tentative notes of the violin followed by Professor Winters's sharp corrections. The interaction with young James had been a brief bright spot in her otherwise routine day. Later that afternoon, May sat at her desk processing new student applications when Dr. Reynolds approached, his tall frame casting a shadow over her workspace. "Ms. Chen, we need these programs reprinted immediately," he announced, dropping a stack of papers on her desk. "There's a typo in the composer's name on page 3. Completely unacceptable. We need 200 copies before tomorrow's concert." May glanced at the stack and then at the clock. It was already past 5, and the copy center would be closing soon. "I'll take care of it right away, Dr. Reynolds." He nodded curtly and turned to leave, then paused. "And make sure they use the correct paper this time. Last month's programs felt cheap." "Yes, sir," May replied, already reaching for her phone to call the print shop. After Dr. Reynolds left, May quickly gathered her things and hurried to the copy center across campus. She managed to convince them to stay open an extra 30 minutes to complete the rush job, promising to help collate the programs herself. By the time she finished and returned to the academy, it was nearly 8 o'clock and the building was mostly empty. May placed the boxes of fresh programs in Dr. Reynolds' office, with a small note explaining that they had been corrected as requested. Then she gathered her belongings, ready to head home after the long day. As she walked down the dimly lit hallway toward the exit, she paused near the main recital hall. The door was slightly ajar, and soft piano music drifted out into the corridor. Curious, May peeked inside. A student was practicing alone on the grand piano, completely absorbed in the music. From where she stood, May could see the young woman's hands moving across the keys, but something about her technique seemed off. Without thinking, May stepped into the hall and moved closer to the piano. The student, noticing her presence, abruptly stopped playing. "I'm sorry," May said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt you." "It's okay," the student replied with a frustrated sigh. "I can't get this part right anyway. Dr. Reynolds is going to kill me if I don't perfect it by next week's performance." Recognize the piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune, one of her favorites. "The middle section is giving you trouble?" The student looked surprised that the administrative assistant would know anything about the piece. "Yes, exactly. My hands aren't stretching correctly for those arpeggios, and the pedaling feels wrong." May stood awkwardly for a moment, then asked, "Would you mind if I showed you something that might help?" The student hesitated, then shrugged and moved over on the bench. "Sure, I guess. I'm desperate at this point." Sitting down carefully, May positioned her hands over the keys. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then began to play just the troublesome section. Her fingers moved with grace and precision, creating flowing notes that seemed to hang in the air like delicate crystal. The pedaling was subtle but effective, blending the sounds without muddying them. When she finished just that small portion, the student stared at her in astonishment. How did you—" May quickly stood up, suddenly self-conscious. "Try angling your wrist a bit more and using the soft pedal sparingly," she suggested quietly. "It helps with the dynamics in that section." "Are you secretly a piano teacher?" the student asked, still looking bewildered. "No, just someone who enjoys piano," May replied with a small smile. "I should go now. Good luck with your practice." As May hurried toward the exit, she didn't notice Dr. Garrett watching from the shadows of the corridor, a puzzled expression on his face as he observed the normally invisible administrative assistant disappear through the doors. The next morning, May arrived at her usual early hour to find a small group of faculty members gathered. In the teacher's lounge, their conversation stopped abruptly when she entered to refill the coffee machine. "Good morning," she said politely, feeling their eyes on her as she worked. "Ms. Chen," Dr. Garrett acknowledged her with unusual attention. "I hear you're quite the pianist." May nearly dropped the coffee pot. "Oh, I just play a little for personal enjoyment," she said, avoiding their curious gazes. "Eliza Wong says differently," he continued, referring to the student from the previous night. "She claims you showed her technique that even Dr. Reynolds hasn't been able to explain properly." The other teachers looked skeptical. May felt her cheeks growing warm as she finished preparing the coffee. "I'm sure Eliza is being kind. If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for the day," she said, quickly exiting the lounge. As she walked to her desk, May could hear them resuming their conversation, their voices lowered but clearly doubtful. She knew they were discussing her, probably dismissing Eliza's claims. After all, how could an administrative assistant possibly understand classical piano at a level to impress students at one of the country's most prestigious music academies? May sat at her desk and turned on her computer, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling of being noticed after months of invisibility. She wasn't ready for their attention or their questions. She had come to Westlake to escape her past, not to reveal it. For now, she would continue as she had been, quietly efficient, forgettably competent, and keeping her true self hidden behind the facade of a simple administrative assistant. But as she organized the day's schedule and prepared for the faculty meeting, her fingers tapped a silent melody on the edge of her desk, a habit she couldn't quite break no matter how hard she tried to blend into the background. Weeks passed, and the incident with Eliza gradually faded from the teacher's gossip. December arrived, bringing with it a flurry of holiday decorations throughout the academy and a noticeable shift in everyone's mood. Students rushed to prepare for end-of-term recitals. Teachers grew increasingly stressed about performances, and May found herself working longer hours to keep up with the administrative chaos that accompanied the season. One morning, Dr. Reynolds called an impromptu faculty meeting. May hurried to set up the conference room, placing notepads and water pitchers on the long mahogany table before the teachers arrived. As she finished arranging chairs, she overheard Dr. Reynolds speaking, with his assistant in the hallway. "Make sure the grand piano in the reception hall is tuned for the holiday party," he said, "and confirm the catering order. Last year they forgot the vegetarian options and Professor Liu didn't let me hear the end of it." May smiled to herself. The annual faculty holiday party was apparently a significant event at Westlake. As a new employee, she had heard stories about previous celebrations, elaborate affairs with fine food, expensive wine, and performances by the instructors themselves. It was the one night when the prestigious academy let loose, though letting loose for classical musicians still meant Bach and Beethoven rather than pop music. Faculty members began filing into the conference room, nodding briefly to May as they took their seats. She slipped out quietly, returning to her desk in the outer office. Through the partially open door, she could hear Dr. Reynolds addressing his colleagues. "As you all know, our annual holiday celebration is next Friday evening," he announced. "This year I've arranged something special. The reception hall has been completely redecorated and we've hired that new chef from downtown, the one with the Michelin star." Approving murmurs filled the room. "Additionally," Dr. Reynolds continued, "I thought we might try something different for entertainment. Rather than the usual performances from department heads, I propose a little game." The room grew quiet, and May found herself leaning slightly toward the door to hear better. "I suggest we invite our non-teaching staff to showcase their musical abilities," Dr. Reynolds said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "After all, they work at a music academy. Surely, they must have picked up something by now." Laughter rippled through the room. May froze at her desk, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Oh, come now, Richard," came the voice of Dr. Garrett. "That seems a bit, what's the word, exclusionary. Most of our administrative staff have no formal training." "That's precisely what makes it entertaining," Dr. Reynolds replied. "I'm not suggesting we mock them, merely that we provide an opportunity for them to participate more fully in our community. I'll offer a generous gift card to anyone brave enough to perform. It's all in good fun." More discussion followed, but May had heard enough. She quietly returned to her filing, her mind racing. Would she be expected to participate? The thought made her stomach tighten with anxiety. She had worked so hard to remain unnoticed, to keep her past private. A public performance would undo everything. Throughout the day, May contemplated calling in sick for the holiday party. It would be the simplest solution. Yet something about Dr. Reynolds's condescending tone bothered her deeply. The assumption that administrative staff couldn't possibly possess musical talent felt dismissive of people who might have chosen different paths for valid reasons. By Friday evening, the night of the party, May had still made no decision. She stood in front of her small apartment mirror examining her appearance. She had chosen a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but more formal than her usual work attire. Her hair, normally in a tight bun, fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She looked different, less invisible, and that alone made her nervous. The reception hall at Westlake had been transformed. Twinkling lights hung from the ceiling, and garlands decorated the walls. A massive Christmas tree stood in one corner, adorned with musical ornaments, tiny golden instruments and notes that caught the light. In the center of the room stood the Academy's finest grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the festive lights. May arrived intentionally late, hoping to blend into the background as usual. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a quiet spot near a large potted plant, partially hidden from view. From her vantage point, she observed the faculty in their element, laughing, drinking, showcasing their expensive outfits and jewelry. They seemed like different people outside the classroom, more relaxed and human. "There you are." A voice startled her. It was Eliza, the piano student she had helped weeks ago. "I almost didn't recognize you with your hair down. You look nice?" May smiled nervously. "Thank you, I didn't expect to see students here." "Some of us were invited to serve drinks and take coats," Eliza explained. "Plus, Dr. Reynolds wanted us to see our teachers in their natural habitat, as he put it. Are you going to play tonight? I heard about his challenge." "Oh, I don't think—" Before May could finish, Dr. Reynolds clinked a spoon against his glass, calling for attention. The room gradually quieted as he stepped onto a small platform near the piano. "Welcome, esteemed colleagues and select students, to our annual holiday gathering," he announced, his voice carrying through the hall. "Before we dive into our magnificent feast, I'd like to introduce tonight's entertainment." He explained his challenge. Any non-teaching staff member who performed a piece on the grand piano would receive a $500 gift card to the city's finest restaurant. The teachers exchanged amused glances while the administrative staff looked uncomfortable. "Let's start with our beloved librarian, Mr. Thompson," Dr. Reynolds suggested. An older man with gray hair reluctantly approached the piano. He sat down and played a simple version of Jingle Bells, hitting several wrong notes along the way. The faculty applauded politely when he finished, though May noticed several hidden smirks. Next came the receptionist, who managed a basic rendition of Heart and Soul, then the building manager, who admitted he could only play scales. Each performance reinforced Dr. Reynolds' unspoken point that the administrative staff's musical abilities were amateurish at best. "And now," Dr. Reynolds said, his eyes scanning the room, "where is our newest addition to the administrative team? Ms. Chen, perhaps you'd like to try?" May felt the blood drain from her face as heads turned in her direction. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the wall behind her. Eliza gave her an encouraging nod, but that only increased her anxiety. "Ms. Chen?" Dr. Reynolds called again, his smile growing wider. "Don't be shy. Everyone has participated so far." Slowly, feeling as though her legs might give way beneath her, May stepped forward. The room seemed to stretch endlessly as she walked toward the piano, aware of every eye watching her, every expectant smile. She could hear whispers, faculty members placing playful bets on whether she would play chopsticks or Mary had a little lamb. Dr. Reynolds stepped aside with an exaggerated bow, gesturing toward the piano with a flourish that made several teachers chuckle. "The stage is yours, Ms. Chen." May sat down on the bench, adjusting it slightly as she'd done thousands of times before. The familiar feel of the polished wood beneath her brought back a flood of memories. Concert halls, competitions, endless hours of practice, Her hands hovered above the keys as she contemplated what to play. She could choose something simple, something that wouldn't raise questions. She could play poorly on purpose, hit wrong notes, and blend in with the other administrative staff. It would be safer that way. But then she looked up and caught Dr. Reynolds's smug expression. He was already turning away, clearly expecting nothing worth hearing. Next to him, Dr. Garrett was checking his watch, and Professor Winters was refilling his champagne glass. Something shifted inside May. A feeling she hadn't experienced in years bubbled up. Pride, perhaps, or defiance. Why should she hide? Why pretend to be less than she was? Her fingers touched the keys and the room fell away. She began softly, the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor flowing from her hands as naturally as breathing. The gentle, questioning melody filled the reception hall, causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. Dr. Reynolds turned back toward the piano, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. May closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. The piece built gradually, growing more complex with each passage. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, navigating the technical challenges that made this composition one of the most difficult in the piano repertoire. The emotional depth of her playing, the way she leaned into certain phrases, the subtle changes in tempo and dynamics, reflected years of study and natural intuition that couldn't be taught. As the piece reached its more dramatic sections, May's body swayed slightly with the music. Her face, usually composed and unreadable, displayed every emotion in the composition. Longing, passion, melancholy, and finally, resolution. The room had gone completely silent except for the music. Even the waitstaff had stopped to listen, trays held motionless in their hands. Dr. Reynolds stood transfixed, his expression shifting from disbelief to confusion to awe. Professor Winters had put down his champagne glass. Dr. Garrett was leaning forward, his eyes wide with astonishment, and Eliza, standing near the back, was grinning broadly, as though she had known all along what was about to happen. When May played the final notes, letting them resonate and fade naturally, the silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. She opened her eyes, suddenly aware again of where she was and what she had done. The faculty stared at her as though seeing her for the first time, which in many ways they were. Then Eliza began to clap and the spell broke. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Teachers who had barely acknowledged May's existence were now on their feet, some wiping away tears, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Dr. Reynolds approached the piano, his earlier smugness replaced with genuine bewilderment. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice barely audible above the continuing applause, "I believe you are owed an explanation about your extraordinary performance. Or perhaps," he added, glancing at his colleagues, "we are the ones owed an explanation." Rose from the bench, her legs trembling slightly. The invisibility she had cultivated so carefully for months had vanished in the span of a 6-minute piece. For better or worse, everyone at Westlake now saw her, really saw her, and there would be no going back. The applause finally died down, leaving an expectant silence in the reception hall. May stood beside the piano, acutely aware of the stares from every direction. Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat, still visibly stunned by what he had just witnessed. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," he suggested, gesturing toward a small sitting area adjacent to the main hall. May nodded, grateful for the chance to escape the spotlight. She followed Dr. Reynolds along, with Dr. Garrett and Professor Winters, who seemed unwilling to miss whatever explanation might follow. As they left, she heard the buzz of conversation resume behind them. Everyone was talking about her performance. The sitting room was warmly lit with a small fireplace and comfortable leather chairs. May perched on the edge of one, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The 3 faculty members sat across from her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and newfound respect. "Ms. Chen," Dr. Reynolds began, his tone markedly different from his usual condescending manner. "That was extraordinary." Chopin's Ballade No. 1 is considered one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire, and you played it with the skill of a concert pianist. Thank you, May said quietly, her eyes focused on her hands. I must admit I'm somewhat at a loss, he continued. Your employment application mentioned nothing about formal musical training, let alone the level of expertise you just demonstrated. May took a deep breath. The moment she had been avoiding for months had arrived. I didn't think it was relevant to my administrative position, she said simply. Professor Winters leaned forward. Not relevant? My dear, you play at a level that most of our advanced students can only dream of achieving. Where did you study? The question hung in the air. May knew she could no longer hide behind vague answers. I trained at the Shanghai Conservatory of Music, she finally admitted. I started when I was 5 years old. The three teachers exchanged glances. The Shanghai Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in Asia, known for its rigorous training and exceptional pianists. And after your training? Dr. Garrett prompted gently. Did you perform professionally? May nodded slowly. For a while, yes. I toured with the Shanghai Symphony Orchestra as a featured soloist when I was 16. Later, I performed throughout Asia and Europe. Wait, Dr. Reynolds interrupted, his brow furrowed in concentration. Shanghai Conservatory? Were you by any chance Mei Chen, the child prodigy who won the International Chopin Competition Junior Division about 20 years ago? May looked up, surprised that he would remember such a detail. Yes, that was me. Professor Winters nearly spilled his drink. Good heavens, I remember reading about you in Classical Music Review. You were hailed as one of the most promising young pianists of your generation. They called you the Pearl of Shanghai. A faint blush colored May's cheeks. She hadn't heard that nickname in years. But then you disappeared from the concert circuit, Dr. Garrett said, his tone puzzled. I remember wondering what had happened. There were rumors. I had an accident, May explained, unconsciously rubbing her right wrist, during a performance tour in Berlin. I fell down a flight of stairs backstage and severely injured both wrists. The doctors weren't sure if I would ever play at the same level again. The room grew quiet as the three faculty members absorbed this information. The fireplace crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The physical recovery took nearly 2 years, May continued, her voice steady despite the painful memories. But the psychological impact was worse. I developed severe performance anxiety. Every time I tried to play in public again, I would freeze, convinced that I would fail, that my technique was permanently damaged. But clearly your technique is impeccable, Dr. Reynolds observed. What we just heard was mastery, not the playing of someone with physical limitations. The physical healing was complete, May acknowledged, but the mental barriers remained. My family had invested everything in my career, money, time, sacrifices. When I couldn't perform anymore, I felt like I had failed them completely. The pressure became too much, so I left China and came to America to start over. And you chose to work as an administrative assistant at a music academy? Professor Winters asked incredulously. Why not teach at the very least? May smiled sadly. I needed to be around music, but without the expectations. As an assistant, no one expected anything from me musically. It was peaceful. For the first time in my life, no one was waiting for me to perform or achieve greatness. I could just exist and appreciate music from a distance. Dr. Reynolds ran a hand through his gray hair, looking genuinely remorseful. And then I organized that ridiculous challenge, putting you on the spot in front of everyone. It's okay, May assured him. Maybe it was time. I've been hiding for too long. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Eliza peeked in, looking apologetic for the intrusion. I'm sorry, but people are asking about dinner. Should we start serving, Dr. Reynolds? Yes, of course, he replied, standing up. Please tell everyone we'll be right there. As Eliza turned to leave, she caught May's eye and gave her a thumbs up, mouthing the words, "You were amazing," before disappearing back into the main hall. Dr. Reynolds turned to May. We should rejoin the party, but this conversation is far from over. Would you be willing to meet with me next week to discuss possibilities? May hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I think I would. They returned to the reception hall, where May immediately became the center of attention. Faculty members who had previously looked through her now approached with warm smiles and questions. Students who had never noticed her existence sought introductions. The sudden visibility was overwhelming after months of anonymity. Throughout dinner, May fielded questions about her training, her performances, and her favorite composers. She answered politely but kept her responses brief, still uncomfortable with being the focus of so much attention. Several times she caught Dr. Reynolds watching her thoughtfully from across the room. After the meal, as guests mingled with coffee and dessert, the piano department's most talented student, a young man named Thomas, approached May. "Would you consider playing a duet with me?" he asked, his expression earnest. "There's a beautiful arrangement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 that I've been working on, but I need a partner who can handle the orchestral reduction." The request took May by surprise. Playing once in the emotional moment had been one thing. Deliberately choosing to perform again was different. She felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. "I don't know if I—" "Please," Thomas persisted. "After hearing you play Chopin like that, it would be an honor." Something in his sincere request touched May. This wasn't about showing off or proving herself. It was simply about making music, with another person who loved it as much as she did. "All right," she agreed quietly. "Let's try." Word spread quickly, and people gathered around the piano as May and Thomas took their places. He arranged the music on the stand and gave her an encouraging nod. They began to play, and May felt something shifting inside her. Unlike her earlier solo performance, which had been fueled partly by defiance, this duet created a different kind of energy. There was joy in the collaboration, in the way their parts complemented each other. When Thomas took the melodic line, May supported him with delicate arpeggios. When it was her turn to shine, he backed away respectfully, allowing her interpretation to flourish. As they played, May realized that she had missed this, not just the piano itself, but the connection that music created between people. The audience around them faded away, and there was only the music flowing between her and Thomas like a conversation between old friends. When they finished, May was surprised to find herself smiling genuinely, without reservation. The applause seemed less important than the music they had just created together. After the duet, the party continued, but with a noticeably different atmosphere. The hierarchical divisions between faculty and staff seemed less pronounced. Conversations flowed more easily, with people mingling across departmental lines. May found herself engaged in discussions about music theory and interpretation with professors who had previously ignored her existence. As the evening wound down, Dr. Garrett approached May with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to her. "2 new beginnings," he said, raising his glass in a toast. May clinked her glass against his, considering his words. Was she really ready for a new beginning? Could she leave behind the safety of anonymity and embrace her identity as a musician again? "I have a confession to make," Dr. Garrett said, interrupting her thoughts. "I suspected you might have some musical background." "You did?" May asked, surprised. "How?" "I noticed how you listen," he explained. "Most people hear music, but musicians listen differently. They follow the phrasing, anticipate the resolutions. I've seen you during student recitals. Your body language changes entirely. You become still, focused, completely absorbed. Only someone who truly understands music listens that way." May had never realized her passion was so visible, even when she tried to hide it. "What will you do now?" Dr. Garrett asked gently. May gazed around the room at the people who now saw her, truly saw her, for the first time. The question hung in the air between them, full of possibilities and uncertainties. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "But I think it's time to stop hiding." As the party came to an end and guests began to leave, May found herself lingering by the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down. The instrument that had once been the center of her world, then a source of anxiety and pain, now felt like an old friend welcoming her back after a long absence. Tomorrow would bring questions, decisions, and perhaps new challenges. But tonight, for the first time in years, May felt the weight of pretending lift from her shoulders. Whatever came next, she would face it as herself, not as the invisible assistant, but as May Chen, pianist. Monday morning arrived with a strange new reality for May. As she walked through the academy doors, the usual invisibility that had once been her comfort was gone. The security guard who had barely nodded at her for months now greeted her by name with a warm smile. Two students practicing in the hallway stopped mid-phrase to stare as she passed. Word had clearly spread beyond those who attended the holiday party. At her desk, May found a small vase of flowers with a note. The gift card as promised, though it seems wholly inadequate now. Dr. Reynolds. Next to it was an expensive restaurant. Gift card for $500. May smiled slightly at the gesture, tucking the card into her purse as she began sorting through the weekend's mail. She had barely started when Dr. Reynolds appeared in her doorway, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Miss Chen, do you have a moment? I've rearranged my morning schedule to speak with you." May nodded and followed him to his office, a grand room with tall windows overlooking the academy gardens. Unlike her previous visits to deliver paperwork, this time he invited her to sit in one of the comfortable chairs facing his desk, rather than standing to receive instructions. "I've been thinking about our conversation on Friday night," he began, steepling his fingers. "And I believe I owe you an apology." May blinked in surprise. In her 3 months at Westlake, she had never heard Dr. Reynolds apologize to anyone. "My little game at the party was thoughtless and condescending," he continued. "I assumed that our administrative staff lacked musical ability simply because they worked in non-teaching positions. It was elitist and narrow-minded." "Thank you for saying that," May replied quietly. "More importantly," he said, leaning forward, "I've been thinking about your situation. Your talent is extraordinary, Ms. Chen. To have someone of your caliber working as an administrative assistant is, forgive me, a waste of remarkable gifts." May tensed slightly. "I chose this position deliberately, Dr. Reynolds." "Yes, I understand that now. But circumstances change. People change." He paused, studying her expression. "I'd like to offer you a teaching position in the piano department." Though she had half expected this after their conversation at the party, hearing the actual offer still sent a jolt through May's system. Teaching at Westlake was a prestigious opportunity that musicians competed fiercely to obtain. I don't have teaching credentials," she stammered. Dr. Reynolds waved his hand dismissively. "Your performance history and conservatory training more than qualify you. We can handle the paperwork. The spring semester begins in January, which gives us 3 weeks to prepare a curriculum for you." May's mind raced. Teaching would mean stepping fully back into the world of music, accepting her identity as a pianist rather than hiding from it. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "I'd like some time to consider it," she said carefully. "Of course," Dr. Reynolds nodded. "But I hope you'll say yes. Our students would benefit tremendously from your expertise." He hesitated, then added, "And perhaps you would benefit as well. Teaching others can sometimes heal our own wounds." After leaving his office, May tried to return to her administrative duties, but concentration proved difficult. Throughout the day, faculty members who had previously ignored her stopped by her desk to chat about music, recommended recordings, or favorite pianists. Students peered at her curiously as they passed. By lunchtime, the constant attention had become overwhelming. Seeking solitude, May retreated to a small practice room in the basement, a cramped space with poor lighting that students typically avoided. She closed the door behind her and sat at the old upright piano, not to play but simply to think in peace. Her fingers absently traced the keys as her thoughts wandered. Teaching at Westlake would mean a complete change in her life's direction. For years, she had defined herself by what she couldn't do. Perform without anxiety. Taking a teaching position would mean defining herself by what she could offer others instead. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. May looked up to see Eliza, standing in the doorway. "Sorry to bother you," the young pianist said. "Everyone's looking for you upstairs." "I needed some quiet," May explained. Eliza nodded understandingly. Suddenly, being the center of attention must be weird after being invisible for so long. She hesitated, then asked, "Is it true that Dr. Reynolds offered you a teaching job?" News. Traveled fast at Westlake. "Yes, but I haven't decided yet." "You should take it," Eliza said with unexpected passion. "Do you know how many of us struggle with teachers who can't really show us how to play? They tell us what to do, but when they demonstrate," she shrugged, "it's not the same as hearing someone who truly masters the instrument." "Teaching is different from performing," May pointed out gently. "But you understand both sides," Eliza insisted. "You know what it's like to perform at the highest level, and you also know what it's like to struggle. That makes you different from most of the teachers here." Before May could respond, another knock came at the door. Professor Winters appeared, looking slightly out of breath. "There you are. I've been searching all over. Could you possibly come to my advanced violin class? We're working on the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, and I'd love my students to hear how you approach the piano accompaniment." The request was delivered with such earnest enthusiasm that May found herself agreeing before she could overthink it. She followed Professor Winters to his classroom, where a dozen violin students waited. With curious expressions, "Class, this is Miss Chen, who will be demonstrating the piano part for the Mendelssohn today," Professor Winters announced. "Many of you have heard about her performance at the holiday party. This is a rare opportunity to observe a pianist of exceptional caliber." May sat at the classroom's grand piano, feeling the familiar flutter of anxiety. But as she began to play the accompaniment while Professor Winters demonstrated passages for his students, something unexpected happened. The focus wasn't on her performance, but on how her playing supported and enhanced the violin. It wasn't about being perfect or impressive. It was about collaboration and bringing the music to life. For the next hour, May found herself deeply engaged in the lesson, offering suggestions about phrasing and dynamics that complemented the violin parts. The students listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the relationship between piano and violin in chamber music. When the class ended, Professor Winters was beaming. "That was magnificent. Would you consider doing this regularly? Perhaps once a week? It would be invaluable for my students." "I'd like that," May replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Throughout the rest of the week, similar requests came from other departments. The voice teacher asked her to accompany a master class. The chamber music director invited her to coach a piano quartet. Each experience helped May reconnect with music in a new way, not as a soloist with all eyes critically upon her, but as a collaborator helping others improve. On Thursday afternoon, as May was finishing her administrative work, Dr. Garrett approached her desk with an unusual request. "One of our scholarship students is struggling with severe performance anxiety," he explained. "Brilliant young pianist, but she freezes up during recitals. Given your personal experience with this issue, would you be willing to speak with her?" The request struck close to home. "What makes you think I could help?" May asked cautiously. "Because you've lived it," Dr. Garrett said simply. "All the faculty here can offer technical advice, but none of us truly understand what she's going through. You do." May agreed to meet the student, a quiet girl named Lynn who reminded May painfully of herself 10 years ago. They talked in one of the small practice rooms away from prying eyes and ears. "My hands shake so badly I can't play the first notes," Lynn confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone is watching, waiting for me to fail." "I know that feeling," May told her. "It's like standing on the edge of a cliff and the music is on the other side of a gap you're not sure you can jump." Lynn looked up, surprised to hear her feelings described so accurately. "Yes, exactly like that. How did you know?" "Because I've stood on that same cliff," May explained. She shared her story, the fall, the injury, the recovery, and the crippling anxiety that followed. For years I couldn't perform, the fear was too strong. But you played at the holiday party, Lynn said. Everyone's talking about how amazing you were. It was the first time I'd performed in public in 7 years, May admitted. And it was terrifying, but also freeing. How did you do it? How did you get past the fear? May considered the question carefully. I'm not sure I did get past it. The fear was still there. But in that moment, something else became more important, showing that I was more than what people assumed me to be. Sometimes you need a reason to play that's stronger than your reason to stay silent. They talked for over an hour, discussing practical techniques for managing anxiety, breathing exercises, visualization, preparation strategies. But more importantly, they talked about the deeper issues: perfectionism, self-worth, the pressure to live up to others' expectations. Would you play something for me? Lynn asked hesitantly as their session was ending. Not a big piece, just anything. May nodded and turned to the piano. She chose a simple Chopin nocturne, gentle and flowing rather than technically demanding. As she played, she noticed how different it felt from the holiday party performance. There was no need to prove anything, no audience to impress. Just two musicians sharing a moment of beauty. When she finished, Lynn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. That's how I want to play. Like it's a gift I'm sharing, not a test I have to pass. That's exactly right, May said softly. Music is a gift, not a test. As Lynn left, promising to return for another conversation soon, May remained at the piano, thinking about her own words. For too many years she had treated music as a test she had failed, rather than a gift she could still. Yes, sir. That evening, as she prepared to leave the academy, May made a detour to Dr. Reynolds's office. He was still there, reviewing student applications for the upcoming semester. I'd like to accept your offer, she said without preamble. With one condition. Dr. Reynolds looked up, surprised but pleased. Name it. I want to keep some of my administrative duties. Specifically, I'd like to coordinate the scholarship program and work with students who need additional support. That's an unusual request, he remarked. Most faculty try to minimize their administrative responsibilities. I know, May acknowledged, but I've realized something important this week. I don't just want to teach students how to play the piano perfectly. I want to help them navigate the challenges that come with being a musician. The pressure, the anxiety, the self-doubt. Sometimes those lessons are more valuable than mastering another concerto. Dr. Reynolds studied her thoughtfully. You know, Ms. Chen, I believe you may be exactly what this academy needs, someone who understands both the music and the musicians. He extended his hand. Welcome to the faculty. As they shook hands, May felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Teaching would bring new challenges, and she wasn't sure if she'd ever fully return to performing. But for the first time in years, she was moving towards something rather than hiding from her past. Later that night, May sat at the small digital piano in her apartment and played, not to practice or perfect anything, but simply for the joy of making music. As her fingers danced across the keys, she realized that she was finally coming home to herself. Note by note, measure by measure, finding her way back to the music that had always been at the center of her soul. 3 months into the spring semester, Westlake Music Academy felt like a different place to May. Her small office, once just a desk in a corner of the administrative area, was now a proper teaching space near the piano practice rooms. Students' thank you cards decorated one wall, along with a concert poster from her performance days that Dr. Garrett had somehow tracked down. The young May in the poster, dressed in formal concert attire with a serious expression, seemed like a different person from the woman she had become. Today, May had arrived early to prepare for her first major project as a faculty member. The winter snow was finally melting outside, and morning sunlight streamed through the windows as she arranged chairs in a circle in one of the larger practice rooms. On a small table, she placed a teapot, cups, and a plate of almond cookies she had baked the night before. A gentle knock at the open door announced Lynn's arrival. The young pianist had become something of an assistant to May over the past months, helping her organize what they had come to call the Performance Anxiety Workshop. "Everything looks perfect," Lynn said, surveying the room. "Do you think anyone will actually show up?" May smiled at her concern. 8 students have already signed up. That's 8 more than I expected when we first proposed this. The workshop had been May's idea, a safe space for students to discuss the mental and emotional challenges of performing. Dr. Reynolds had been skeptical at first, preferring to focus on technique and repertoire rather than psychological aspects of musicianship. But he had eventually agreed to let May try, especially after seeing the improvement in Lynn's recent performances. "I'm nervous about sharing my story with everyone," Lynn admitted as she helped arrange the cookies on the plate. "You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with," May reminded her gently. "But remember how it felt when you realized you weren't alone in your struggles? That's what we're offering others today." Students began arriving. First, just a trickle, then more than expected. By the time they began, 14 young musicians had squeezed into the room, representing every department from strings to voice to percussion. May recognized some of the Academy's most talented performers among them, which surprised her. Even those who appeared confident on stage were apparently battling their own private doubts. "Welcome, everyone," May began once they were settled with tea and cookies. "Thank you for being brave enough to come today. It takes courage to admit that making music isn't always joyful or easy." She shared her own story first, the abbreviated version that included her training, her accident, and the anxiety that had driven her away from performing. The students listened intently, many nodding in recognition at the feelings she described. "I thought I was the only one who threw up before performances," admitted a violinist after May finished. "My teacher always says I just need to practice more, but it's not about being unprepared. It's this overwhelming dread that I'll disappoint everyone." One by one, students began sharing their experiences. A cellist described how his hands shook so badly before recitals that he couldn't turn his sheet music. A flautist confessed to taking her mother's anxiety medication before performances. A vocalist talked about the panic attacks that had led her to consider quitting music altogether. Lynn spoke last, her voice quiet but steady as she described her journey from debilitating fear to her recent successful performance at a department recital. "What made the difference," she explained, "was changing how I think about performing. Professor Chen helped me see that music isn't about being perfect. It's about connecting with the composer's intentions, with your own emotions, with the audience. When I focus on that connection instead of on what might go wrong, the fear doesn't disappear, but it becomes manageable." The discussion continued for 2 hours, far longer than May had planned. By the end, the students were exchanging phone numbers and making plans to support each other at upcoming performances. Several asked if the workshop could become a regular event. As they filed out, Professor Winters appeared in the doorway. He had been one of May's strongest supporters among the faculty, often sending his students to her for help with piano accompaniment and performance issues. "That looked like a success," he observed, helping May gather the empty teacups. "I counted 14 students. Not bad for a voluntary workshop on a Friday afternoon." "It went better than I expected," May admitted. "I thought maybe a few would come, but so many opened up about their struggles. There's clearly a need for this kind of support." Professor Winters nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when Reynolds first told us he was offering you a teaching position, I wondered if you had enough experience. I was wrong. You're bringing something to these students that many of us with decades of teaching experience can't offer: understanding from the inside." His words touched May deeply. She had worried about her lack of formal teaching credentials, wondering if the students would respect her authority. But what they seemed to value most was precisely what had once felt like her greatest weakness: her familiarity with failure and fear, and her journey to overcome them. Later that afternoon, as May was gathering her belongings to leave for the weekend, Dr. Reynolds appeared at her office door. His formal demeanor had softened somewhat in the months they had worked together as colleagues. Though he maintained the high standards and occasional sharp criticism that had made him both respected and feared at Westlake. "I've been meaning to speak with you about something important," he said, taking a seat across from her desk. "The Board of Trustees has approved funding for a special concert series next month, a showcase of faculty talent to raise money for our scholarship fund." May nodded, waiting for him to continue. She had heard rumors about the event. "I'd like you to perform," he said directly. "A solo piece of your choosing." The request hung in the air between them. May felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest, but it was less intense than it would have been a few months ago. "I haven't performed solo in public since the holiday party," she said carefully. "And that was different, unexpected. I didn't have time to worry about it." "I know," Dr. Reynolds acknowledged. "And I wouldn't ask if I didn't think you were ready. But what you've been doing with your students, helping them face their performance fears, has been remarkable. Perhaps it's time for you to take your own advice." "What if I'm not ready?" May asked quietly. "Then you decline, and no one thinks less of you," he assured her. "But consider this. Your story has already inspired many of our students. Imagine what seeing you perform again, deliberately choosing to return to the stage, might mean to them, especially those in your workshop." He left her with the program details and a promise that she could take the weekend to decide. May sat alone in her office for a long time after he left, considering the invitation. The thought of performing again, planning for it, preparing, walking onto the stage with full awareness, made her pulse race. But there was something else beneath the fear, a flicker of excitement, of longing for that unique connection with the music and the audience. That evening, May went home and opened the cabinet where she kept her most treasured possessions. Among them was a small wooden box containing programs from her performances as a young pianist. She hadn't looked at them in years, but now she spread them on her kitchen table, studying the repertoire she had once played with confidence. One program in particular caught her eye, her final performance before the accident. She had played Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 31, Op. 110, a piece of profound emotional depth that moved from struggle to transcendence. She remembered how much the piece had meant to her then, how it had seemed to contain the entire range of human experience within its movements. May sat at her digital piano and with trembling fingers began to play from memory. The notes came back slowly at first, then with increasing fluidity as muscle memory awakened. It wasn't perfect. Her technique was rusty in places, but the emotional core of the music was still there, perhaps even richer now that she had experienced more of life's complexities. When she finished the sonata, tears were streaming down her face, not from sadness or fear, but from the pure relief of reclaiming something precious she had thought was lost forever. The next morning, May called Dr. Reynolds and accepted his invitation. She would perform the Beethoven Sonata at the faculty showcase. Then she called Lynn and asked if she would help her prepare, turning their roles of teacher and student upside down as Lynn became her coach and supporter through the process. The weeks leading up to the showcase were challenging. May practiced, daily, gradually rebuilding her technical precision while working through moments of panic and doubt. She applied the techniques she taught her students: breathing exercises, positive visualization, focusing on the music rather than the audience. Some days were better than others, but the supportive community she had built at Westlake carried her through the difficult moments. On the night of the performance, the concert hall was packed with students, faculty, and patrons of the academy. Backstage, May felt the familiar butterflies in her stomach, the slight trembling in her hands as she waited for her turn. Lynn stood beside her, a calm presence offering quiet encouragement. "Remember what you told us," Lynn whispered as May prepared to walk on stage. "It's not about being perfect, it's about connection." May nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped into the spotlight. The applause that greeted her was warm and enthusiastic. As she took her seat at the piano, she noticed her workshop students scattered throughout the audience, their faces full of support and understanding. Dr. Reynolds sat in the front row, alongside Professor Winters and Dr. Garrett. Even the Academy's Administrative staff had turned out in full force to support their former colleague. For a moment, May sat perfectly still, gathering herself. Then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes of the Beethoven sonata filled the hall, tentative at first, then growing in confidence as she lost herself in the music. There were a few small mistakes along the way. Missed note here, a slightly rushed passage there, imperfections that the old May would have considered catastrophic. But the new May played through them, understanding that they were merely moments in a larger journey. What mattered was the story she was telling through the music, the emotional truth she was sharing with everyone present. By the final movement, May had forgotten her fear. The triumphant fugue that concludes the sonata flowed from her fingers with conviction and joy. When she played the final chords, there was a moment of profound silence before the audience erupted in applause and rose to their feet. As May stood to acknowledge the ovation, she caught sight of Lynn in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she applauded wildly. Behind her, Dr. Reynolds was beaming with pride. And scattered throughout the audience, her workshop students were cheering the loudest of all. In that moment, May understood that her journey had come full circle. The teachers who had once tried to humiliate her had instead given her the push she needed to reclaim her voice. The talent that had shocked them had now found its true purpose, not just in performance, but in teaching, mentoring, and building a community where vulnerability was seen as strength rather than weakness. She took her final bow. May knew that the path ahead would still have challenges. There would be good performances and difficult ones, days of confidence and moments of doubt. But she would never again hide her true self or deny her gifts. The music that had once been her burden had become her healing, and now, her offering to others walking the same difficult path.